When you take a step back and you're looking at how universities are dealing with this rise of anti-Semitism on their campuses right now, and the absolute criticism they are facing from some of their top donors, an individual like Mark Rowan of Apollo Capital, as a former president, who is getting it right, do you think?
Well, I would say that there's plenty of fault to go around. There are very few institutions getting it right, in my judgment. I taught constitutional law. There is no exception for hate speech. And hate speech as a general matter is protected. But there are things like shouting down speakers, there's harassment, there are all sorts of issues that need to be regulated. And I think universities need to have clear rules. They need to be stated in advance. People need to be warned. And then, if necessary, coordination with people who are concerned with safety and student affairs people to enforce the rules of the campus. And in many places, that's simply not happening. So I think the campuses are quite vulnerable. They need strong rules. They need to enforce them. They need to understand it. They need to make sure their people understand it and the students understand it.
We had some pretty difficult exchanges today in this hearing, Mark. I'd like to bring you and our viewers in the room for a moment. A great example of this exchange between Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, a Republican, and Harvard President Claudine Gay. Let's listen and have you respond.
Do you believe that type of hateful speech is contrary to Harvard's code of conduct, or is it allowed at Harvard?
It is at odds with the values of Harvard.
Can you not say here that it is against the code of conduct at Harvard?
We embrace a commitment to free expression, even of views that are objectionable, offensive, hateful. It's when that speech crosses into conduct that violates our policies against bullying, harassment,
does that speech not cross that barrier?
Stefanik had a similar exchange with UPenn President Liz McGill that a lot of folks are sharing on social media. These tortured conversations, Mark, are universities seeking nuance when there is not any?
I don't know if it's nuance. I mean, I agree with President Gay that the most horrible racist speech, homophobic speech, misogynistic speech is constitutionally protected. So that's proposition one. But there is a tension between equal protection, non-discrimination under the 14th Amendment, and free speech under the First. And Title VI is the response to that. So it may be that you can't silence the speakers unless they do something else, like harass students or otherwise try to intimidate people. But nonetheless, you can file a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights, and the university is the defendant. You're not silencing the speakers, you're not suing the speakers, but you're saying to the university, you have a hostile environment for Jewish students, for Israeli students, for people who identify with the Jewish people, and you need to take steps to do something about that. And too often, they've ignored things like anti-Semitism education. They've ignored things like training programs for student affairs staff. Those systemic things need to take place. So my view is the speech, if you were to require silencing the speakers, that may be problematic. Now, there's one footnote to all this. In many cases, Columbia, Penn, MIT today, we're talking about private universities. The truth is they have more latitude than a public university like the University of California and like the University of Texas. So they can have stricter measures, in my view. They're not subject to the First Amendment. They're not a part of the government that is governed by First Amendment principles. So they have wider latitude. And I think you've seen in places like George Washington, more recently at Columbia. The other thing I think that is driving all this, the campuses are divided as never before. When you're against homophobia, you get almost total agreement on university campuses. When Black Lives Matter and there were police-involved killings, you have almost total agreement. When you're talking about Palestine and Israel, you do not have that. You have a very, very divisive issue. I was there at Harvard during the Vietnam War. I never met a student or faculty member who was in favor of the war. But obviously, if you look at the clips from Columbia and other campuses, Harvard, those communities are very deeply divided. And that, I think, is relatively new and relatively dangerous for campus environments.
Well, you're talking about actions campuses can take that you think they need to take immediately. So are we dealing with an issue of these cultures around campuses? Because Mark Rowan earlier on Surveillance today said it's not a question of free speech. It's that these campuses have favored speech and disavowed speech. Is there just a culture that has taken over at these universities? Is that the problem?
I think that's part of the problem. I mean, it's not acceptable to issue statements that Black people don't belong on the campus, or that women don't belong in higher education; they belong in the home. To state that as a position, and every day, if you're on these emails that I'm on, you're getting communications that say that we need to protect these communities. In many of these universities, and sometimes it's oversight, it's not malice, but Jews were not included. They look like they're doing well. They're represented at many of the major universities and in relatively large numbers. They're not always economically poor. In fact, they're probably above average income. It just was never on the radar screen. And that's a lesson they've missed. The DEI offices, the diversity, equity, inclusion offices in America need to focus on anti-Semitism and the history of the Jewish people every bit as much as they focus on these other groups. There's also this narrative, which is dominant among many young people, maybe the majority, I don't know, that the problem in the world is oppression, colonialism, and the like. And that narrative includes Israel. Without any knowledge of the history of Israel or the history of the Jewish people, they've never heard of the Balfour Declaration. They have no idea of, who was expelled from Spain in the 15th century and all the rest of that. So I think there's a tremendous ignorance problem accompanied by some people who view their jobs in a way that inevitably makes Jewish people and the state of Israel the enemy of what they want to accomplish. There are a few bad apples, but I'm a child of the Enlightenment. I believe that we can bring light to these issues and persuade a lot of people to expand the circle of inclusion of groups that you need to watch out for.